I never wanted to share this story. Not with anyone. Not for a long time. When you experience something like I did, something that defies explanation, you learn pretty quickly who's willing to listen and who's already made up their mind about what's possible in this world. But keeping it inside, that's been its own kind of hell. So here I am. My name is Michael Tanner, Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army 10th Mountain Division. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan between 2009 and 2013. I was a forward observer, artillery specialist. My job was to call in fire missions, determine coordinates, make sure the big guns hit what they were supposed to hit and avoided what they weren't. I was good at my job. Damn good. Until February 17th, 2011, when everything changed. When I died for 16 minutes and 43 seconds. The doctors have their explanations. Clinical death, hypoxia, hallucinations from trauma and blood loss. I've heard them all. But with respect to those medical professionals who saved my life, they weren't there. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear what I heard. They didn't hear my mother calling me home. My mother who had passed away 3 years before I ever set foot in Afghanistan. Long pause. I grew up in Greenfield, Massachusetts. Small town, everyone knows everyone. My dad worked at the paper mill for 30 years. Mom taught 3rd grade at the elementary school. I had a pretty normal childhood. Played baseball, got in trouble, did okay in school. Nothing special. My mom was the spiritual one in the family. Dad was a Christmas and Easter Christian, but Mom had faith like you wouldn't believe. Not the preachy kind, the quiet kind, the kind that ran bone deep. She believed in things beyond what we could see. Angels, spirits, heaven, all of it. I used to roll my eyes when she'd talk about feeling presences or getting signs from past loved ones. Michael, she'd say, there's a thin veil between this world and the next. Sometimes, if you're paying attention, you can see right through it. I'd nod and change the subject. I loved my mom, but I didn't believe in any of that. I was a practical kid who grew into a practical man. I enlisted right out of high school in 2006. Partly patriotism after 9/11, partly because college wasn't for me, partly because I wanted to get out of Greenfield and see something of the world. My dad had served in Vietnam, my grandfather in Korea. It felt like the family business in a way. Basic training was what you'd expect. Brutal, transformative. I came out the other side stronger, more disciplined. Found out I had an aptitude for mathematics and spatial awareness, which led me to artillery and eventually becoming a forward observer. My first deployment was Iraq in 2007 to 2008. Pretty uneventful compared to what came later. I was still green, still figuring things out. Came home intact, did some additional training, and then got my orders for Afghanistan in late 2009. That's when things got real. Deep breath. My mom got sick while I was in Iraq. Pancreatic cancer. By the time they caught it, it was already stage 4. I got emergency leave and made it home just in time. Spent 2 weeks by her hospital bed before she passed. She was 53. The last coherent thing she said to me was, "I'll be waiting for you, Michael. Not yet, but someday. I'll call you home when it's time." I chalked it up to the morphine and the dying brain doing what dying brains do. I kissed her forehead, told her I loved her, and 12 hours later, she was gone. I buried that grief deep. Didn't know what else to do with it. I had a job, responsibilities, people counting on me. So I compartmentalized. Pushed it down, deployed to Afghanistan 3 months later with the 10th Mountain. Forward Operating Base Shank, Logar Province. That was home for my first Afghanistan tour. They called it Rocket City because of how frequently we took indirect fire, mostly ineffective. The Taliban weren't exactly expert marksmen with their mortars and rockets. They'd lob them over the wire, they'd explode somewhere in the fob, and we'd go about our day. You get used to it. That's the crazy thing about war. The human ability to normalize the insane. Incoming fire? Hit the dirt, wait for the all clear, then head to chow like nothing happened. My second tour, I was at Combat Outpost Herrera, a smaller installation in Wardak Province. Higher elevation, more remote, and a lot more kinetic. We were taking fire almost daily, conducting patrols in areas where the locals either feared us or hated us, sometimes both. I'd changed by then. We all had. That first deployment innocence was gone. I'd lost friends, seen things I can't unsee, become harder, more focused, maybe a little colder. The idealistic kid from Massachusetts was gone. In his place was a soldier who understood that survival meant keeping your head down and your guard up. It was during a 2-week R&R break between my second and third tours that I had the dream. The first one anyway. I was back home in Greenfield, staying at my dad's house. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up in a cold sweat. In the dream, I'd been in a barren field, all brown dust and rocks. Afghanistan landscape. There was a blinding light, and then my mother was standing there in the simple blue dress she used to wear to church. She looked healthy again. No sign of the cancer that had ravaged her. "Not yet," she said in the dream. "But soon, Michael. I'll call you when it's time." I got up, splashed water on my face, and tried to shake it off. Just stress and grief playing tricks, I told myself. But the dream felt different, more vivid, more real somehow. I didn't tell anyone. Not my dad, not my buddies. Definitely not the Army psychologist. Last thing I needed was to get flagged for mental health concerns before my third deployment. January 2011, I shipped out for my third tour, back to Fob Shank initially, but within a few weeks, I was reassigned to a small outpost near the Pakistan border. Outpost Chumkani, just a tiny fortified position on a hilltop, overlooking a crucial valley that served as a Taliban transit route. There were only 32 of us there, a mix of infantry, artillery, intelligence, and support personnel. Our mission was observation, and when necessary, calling in air or artillery support to disrupt enemy movement. We also worked with local Afghan forces, trying to build their capacity, whatever that meant. The outpost itself was nothing special. HESCO barriers, sandbags, a few plywood structures, concertina wire. We had minimal comforts, a small gym area with some weights, a TV and gaming console in the common area, and a makeshift kitchen where our designated cook did his best with what we had. My battle buddy was Dave Connolly, a lanky kid from Oregon who'd been a competitive shooter before joining up. He was our best marksman and my spotter when we'd set up observation points. Smart guy, quiet, with a weird sense of humor that only emerged once you really got to know him. "You ever think about what happens when you die, Tanner?" He asked me one night as we sat on watch, scanning the valley below through night vision. "Jesus, Connolly, that's a little dark even for you," I replied. He shrugged. "Just curious. My grandma was super religious. Said she saw angels sometimes. I always thought she was just getting senile, but I don't know. Makes you wonder." I thought about my mom then, about her belief in the thin veil, about my dream, but I kept it to myself. "I think you're dead and that's it," I lied. Lights out. "Cold, man." Connolly laughed. "That's cold." 3 days later, February 16th, our outpost took indirect fire around sunset. 4 mortar rounds widely dispersed. No casualties, minimal damage. Standard harassment fire, designed to keep us on edge, disrupt sleep, wear us down. We returned fire, though we had no real targets, just suspected firing positions. That night, I had the dream again. My mother in the blue dress, standing in the Afghan landscape. But this time she was closer, and her expression was different. Urgent, concerned. "I'm going to call you home soon, Michael," she said. "Be ready." I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. It was 4:30, almost time for my watch rotation anyway. I got up, pulled on my gear, and tried to shake the unsettled feeling that clung to me like a shadow. At breakfast, Connolly noticed something was off. "You look like shit, Tanner." "Thanks. Just didn't sleep well." "More nightmares?" I hadn't told him about my previous nightmares, but he'd bunked near me long enough to notice the pattern. I just nodded, not wanting to get into it. "Maybe you should talk to someone," he suggested. "Doc Wilson is pretty cool. Won't rat you out unless it's serious." "I'm fine," I insisted. "Just need more coffee." Captain Reynolds called a briefing after breakfast. Intelligence had picked up chatter about increased Taliban movement in our area. We were to maintain heightened alert with extra observation posts and more frequent patrols. They're planning something," Reynolds said, pointing to a map of the surrounding terrain. "We've got reports of fighters moving through these villages here and here, plus new faces showing up, possibly foreign fighters." I was assigned to the Eastern Observation Post with Connolly for the morning rotation. It was a sandbag position about 50 meters from the main outpost perimeter, offering a good view of the approach from that direction. The morning passed quietly, too quietly maybe. Usually there would be some farmer activity in the distant fields, goat herders moving their flocks, occasional vehicle movement, but the landscape seemed strangely empty. "I don't like this," Connolly muttered around 1100 hours. "Wickwin, where is everyone?" I keyed my radio. "Outpost, this is OP East. We're seeing no civilian activity in our sector. Possible indicator of pending attack. Over." "Copy that, OP East," came the reply. "We've got similar reports from South and West. Maintain vigilance." out. By noon, the temperature had climbed to over 90 degrees and the tension was building. That sixth sense you develop in combat zones was screaming that something was coming. I found myself checking and rechecking my weapon, adjusting my body armor, running through mental scenarios. At 13:17 hours, all hell broke loose. The first mortar round hit just inside the main perimeter of the outpost. Then another. And another. This wasn't the usual harassment fire. This was a coordinated barrage, and the accuracy was unprecedented for Taliban mortars. "Taking fire!" I shouted into the radio, though it was obvious to everyone. Multiple impacts inside the wire. Connolly and I were returning to the main outpost when I heard the distinctive whistle of an incoming round headed right for us. There's a moment, a split second really, where your training takes over. I shoved Connolly hard to the left and dove right. The mortar hit about 15 meters away, close enough that the concussion picked me up and slammed me back down. I felt a sharp, burning pain in my right side and leg. When I looked down, my uniform was already soaking through with blood. Tanner. Connolly was scrambling toward me, staying low as more rounds impacted nearby. "I'm hit," I managed to say, though my own voice sounded distant, muffled. "Pretty bad." He dragged me behind a low stone wall, already pulling out his first aid kit. I could tell from his face that it was worse than pretty bad. "Hang on, man. Medic A," he screamed into his radio. "Man down at OP East. Need immediate medical?" I was starting to feel cold despite the heat of the day. I recognized the signs of shock setting in. My training told me this was serious, potentially fatal. I tried to stay calm, tried to remember my combat lifesaver training. "Pressure," I mumbled. "Keep pressure on it." Connolly was already doing that, pressing down on my side where the worst of the bleeding seemed to be coming from. His hands were red with my blood. "Stay with me, Tanner. Help is coming." His voice sounded scared. Dave Connolly, who never showed fear, sounded terrified. More explosions rocked the outpost. Through increasingly blurry vision, I could see black smoke rising from several points within the perimeter. The barrage was still ongoing, and it was clear the Taliban had somehow zeroed in on our position with unprecedented accuracy. A strange calm began to settle over me. The pain was still there, but it felt more distant, less immediate. I found myself thinking about my mom, about her last words to me, about the dreams. "Connolly," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "If I don't make it, shut up. You're making it." He pressed harder on my wound, making me wince. "Doc's coming. Just hang on." I tried. I really did. But I could feel myself slipping away. My extremities were numb now, my vision narrowing to a tunnel. The sounds of battle, the explosions, the gunfire, the shouting, all began to fade. And then cutting through it all, I heard her voice. "Michael, it's time to come home." My mother's voice, as clear as if she were standing right beside me. Not in my head, in my ears. Actual sound waves. "Mom," I whispered. Connolly looked at me strangely. "What?" "Tanner, stay with me." But I wasn't talking to him anymore. I was responding to my mother, whose voice I could hear calling me from somewhere beyond the chaos. "It's okay, Michael. You can let go now. I'm here to bring you home." The tunnel of my vision collapsed to a pinpoint, and then there was nothing but darkness. I died on that hillside in Afghanistan. That's not dramatic license or metaphor. My heart stopped. My breathing ceased. By medical definition, at 13:29 hours on February 17, 2011, Staff Sergeant Michael Tanner was killed in action. What happened next defies explanation, at least any explanation that fits neatly into the world as most of us understand it. The darkness was brief. That's the first thing that surprised me. I'd always imagined death as an endless void, but this darkness lasted only moments before it gave way to something else. I was moving, or being moved. There was a sensation of tremendous speed, yet also perfect stillness. Like being on a train where you can't feel the motion, but can see the landscape blurring past. Except there was no landscape, just a tunnel of soft, indistinct light. The pain was gone, completely gone. So was the weight of my body armor, the grit of Afghan dust on my skin, the ringing in my ears from the explosions. I felt lighter, unburdened. And through it all, my mother's voice continued to call to me. "This way, Michael. I'm here." I couldn't see her yet, but I could feel her presence growing stronger, more tangible. The tunnel of light began to widen, opening up into a vastness I can't adequately describe. It wasn't a place in the conventional sense. It was more like a state of being, a dimension where physical laws as we understand them don't apply. The light wasn't blinding, despite its brightness. It was warm, welcoming, and standing within it, taking shape as I approached, was my mother. She looked younger than I remembered, vibrant and healthy. No trace of the cancer that had ravaged her body. She wore that blue dress, the one from my dreams, and she was smiling at me with such love that it would have brought me to my knees if I'd still had them. Mom? My voice wasn't physical anymore. It was thought, intention, pure communication. Hello, my sweet boy. Her smile widened. You've come so far. I moved toward her, or my consciousness did. Physical movement had no meaning in this place. One moment I was at a distance, the next I was right beside her. She embraced me, and though there were no bodies in the conventional sense, the feeling of her embrace was more real, more solid than anything I'd ever experienced in life. Am I dead? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Your body has stopped, yes, she said, but you're more alive now than you've ever been. Behind her, the light seemed to pulse and shift. I had the distinct impression that there was more beyond, much more. Other presences, other consciousnesses, a vast community of souls. There are others who want to greet you, my mother said, confirming my feeling. So many others, I could sense them now. Friends I'd lost in combat, my grandfather. People I knew and people I didn't, all connected somehow, all part of a vast, loving network of consciousness. But before I could move further, before I could greet these others, my mother's expression changed. It became more serious, though no less loving. Michael, I need you to listen carefully, she said. This isn't your time. Not yet. Confusion washed over me. But you called me home. You said it was time. She nodded. I called you here because there's something you need to know. Something you need to carry back. A message. Back? I don't understand. Your work isn't finished, Michael. Your purpose, the reason you were born, it's still waiting for you. I felt a resistance rising in me. Now that I was here, now that I'd experienced this peace, this love, the thought of going back to the pain, the chaos, the limitations of physical existence seemed unbearable. I don't want to go back, I said. Please don't make me go back. My mother's eyes were infinitely compassionate. I know, sweetheart, I know. But this isn't about what any of us want. It's about what needs to be. As she spoke, I became aware of something happening to the light around us. It was shifting, organizing itself into what looked like scenes, moments from my life, but not just my past, my future, possibilities, paths. You have a choice, my mother said, gesturing to these shifting scenes. You can stay here with me, with all of us, or you can return and fulfill the purpose you were born for. What purpose? I asked. What could possibly be important enough to go back to that? She smiled sadly. That's not for me to tell you. You'll discover it, but I can show you this much. One of the scenes expanded, becoming more prominent than the others. In it, I saw myself, older, with some gray in my hair, sitting across from a young soldier. The soldier looked broken, haunted. I was talking to him, and as I watched, I could see something change in his expression. Hope, understanding, a burden lifting. The scene shifted. Another soldier, another conversation, then another. Dozens of them, hundreds perhaps, all showing me reaching out to veterans in pain, sharing something with them that transformed their despair into something more bearable. These are souls who will be lost without what you can give them, my mother said softly. What only you can give them. What is it I'm giving them? I asked. What do I have that's so special? The truth, Michael. The truth about what waits beyond the veil. The truth that there is purpose, that there is love, that death is not the end but a transition. I looked at the scenes again, really looked at them. These weren't just casual conversations. These were moments of profound connection, of one soul reaching another at their darkest hour and pulling them back from an abyss. How many of them survive because of what you share? My mother asked, though it wasn't really a question. We both knew the answer was there in the scenes before us. I felt a weight settling on me, not the physical weight of my body, but the weight of responsibility, of purpose. These people needed something I would have, something I alone could provide. If I go back, I said slowly, will I remember this? All of this? My mother nodded. You'll remember. Not right away. Your brain won't be ready to process it immediately. But in time, yes. You'll remember everything that matters. And I'll see you again? When it really is my time. She reached out and touched my face, or the essence of what had been my face. I'll be here waiting. We all will, for as long as it takes. I looked back at the scenes one more time, at the faces of the men and women whose lives would intersect with mine if I returned. I counted among them Dave Connolly, his face older, strained, but alive. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll go back." My mother's smile was radiant. "My brave boy. Always my brave boy." She embraced me once more. And in that embrace, I felt not just her love, but the love of all the presences behind her. A vast network of souls, all connected, all part of a greater whole. "Remember," she whispered. "Remember what you've seen? Remember what waits? And most importantly, remember the message." "What message?" I asked, suddenly confused. "You haven't given me a message." "Not yet," she said. "Listen carefully now." She leaned closer, and as she did, the light around us began to contract. The tunnel was forming again, but in reverse. I was being pulled back, away from her, away from this realm of peace and connection. "Mom!" I called out, suddenly panicked. "Mom, what's the message?" Her voice came to me as I was pulled further and further away, growing fainter but still clear. "Tell them they are never alone. Tell them love remains. Tell them death is not the end of the story. It's only the turning of a page." The tunnel collapsed around me, narrowing to a pinpoint. The last thing I saw was my mother's face, serene and loving, as she raised her hand in farewell. Then darkness again, but different this time. Heavier, confined, and pain. So much pain. I gasped or tried to. There was something in my throat. Voices around me, urgent, professional, beeping machines. The smell of antiseptic. "He's back. We've got rhythm. BP coming up. Pupils responsive. Get that crash cart out of here. Where's that O-neg? Staff Sergeant? Staff Sergeant Tanner? Can you hear me?" I couldn't respond. Couldn't move. But I could hear them. I was back. I had died in Afghanistan from a mortar attack. I had heard my mother calling me home. And I had returned with a message. But the real journey was only just beginning. I spent 46 days in a medically induced coma. 46 days while surgeons worked to repair what the mortar had done to my body. Shrapnel had torn through my right side, lacerating my liver, collapsing my lung, and severing an artery. I'd lost nearly 70% of my blood volume in the field. By all medical standards, I should not have survived. When I finally emerged from the coma at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, the first face I saw was my father's, unshaven, exhausted, aged a decade in less than 2 months. "Michael," he choked out when he saw my eyes open. Thank God. I couldn't speak yet. The tube had just come out of my throat, and everything felt raw, scraped. But I managed to raise my hand slightly. He grabbed it and held on like he was afraid I'd slip away again. A doctor came in, Dr. Abramson, I would later learn, and began checking my vitals, shining a light in my eyes, asking simple questions. Could I wiggle my toes? Did I know my name? Did I know where I was? I managed to croak out, "Germany?" That seemed to please him. "Very good, Sergeant Tanner. You're at Landstuhl. You've been unconscious for quite some time, but you're stable now." As awareness returned, so did the memories. Afghanistan, the mortar attack, Connolly dragging me behind the wall. And then, "Mom," I whispered. My father looked startled. "What's that, son?" "I saw Mom," I said, my voice barely audible. Dad exchanged a look with the doctor. That look people give when they think someone's confused, delusional. It's very common for patients coming out of prolonged sedation to experience vivid dreams or hallucinations. "Doctor, Abramson said smoothly. "Don't worry about that now. Focus on resting." But it hadn't been a dream or hallucination. It had been more real than the hospital room I was lying in. More real than anything I'd ever experienced. I wanted to tell them, to explain, but exhaustion was already pulling me back under. Not the coma this time, just regular sleep. My last thought before darkness claimed me again was simple. I remembered everything. The next few days passed in a blur of medical procedures, tests, and brief periods of lucidity between pain medication doses. During one of these clearer moments, my father filled me in on what had happened after I'd been hit. "Dave Connolly saved your life," he told me. "Got a tourniquet on you. Kept pressure on the worst bleeders until the medic arrived. Even with incoming still hitting all around." "Where is he now?" I asked. "Back in Afghanistan. His tour's not up yet, but he calls for updates whenever he can." Dad's eyes were red-rimmed. "He was here when they first brought you in, before they sent you to Germany. Said to tell you that you owe him a beer." I managed a weak smile at that. "Sounds like Dave." The outpost took heavy casualties that day. 4 KIA, 11 wounded including you. The Taliban had somehow gotten exact coordinates. Intelligence thinks they might have had help from someone inside the Afghan forces. I nodded. It didn't surprise me. The accuracy of that barrage had been too precise for the usual Taliban mortar teams. They're saying it's a miracle you made it, Dad continued. The medic who worked on you in the field, the surgeons in Afghanistan, even the doctors here, they all say the same thing. You shouldn't be alive. I died. I said softly. I actually died. Dad shifted uncomfortably. You flatlined for a while, yes, in the field hospital, but they brought you back. No. I tried to sit up, winced at the pain. Before that, on the hillside, I died there. Michael, you were in shock. You lost consciousness. Dad, I cut him off, my voice stronger than it had been since waking up. I died. I saw Mom. He went very still. What? I saw Mom, I repeated. She was waiting for me. On the other side, Dad's expression was a complex mix of concern, grief, and something else. A flicker of desperate hope, quickly suppressed. Son, you were severely traumatized. Your brain was oxygen deprived. These kinds of visions are documented in near-death experiences. It wasn't a vision, I insisted. She spoke to me. She was wearing her blue church dress. She told me it wasn't my time yet, that I had to come back because I had something important to do. Dad's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't know what to say. She showed me the future. I continued, the words spilling out now. Showed me people I'm supposed to help. Veterans like me. Michael. His voice was gentle but firm. You need to rest. We can talk about this later. But I could see it in his eyes. He thought I was traumatized, confused, maybe even brain damaged. And perhaps I was by medical standards. But I knew what I had experienced. It was too real, too consistent, too detailed to be a hallucination. The blue dress, I said as he stood to leave. The one she's wearing in that photo you keep by your bed. The one she wore to Easter service the year before she got sick. Dad froze, his back to me. She never wore that dress in the hospital, I continued. I never saw her in it during her illness. So how would my oxygen-deprived brain conjure that specific image? He turned slowly. Get some rest, son. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with memories that felt more solid, more tactile than the hospital bed beneath me. Over the next few weeks, my physical recovery progressed faster than anyone expected. The damaged tissues were healing well. My lung function was returning. Even the nerve damage in my right leg was responding to treatment, though the doctors warned I might always walk with a limp. What didn't progress was my ability to make anyone believe what had happened to me. Not the doctors, not the psychiatrists they inevitably sent to evaluate me, not even my father. They all nodded sympathetically when I tried to explain. They all had their scientific explanations. Temporal lobe activity during oxygen deprivation, the brain's self-protective mechanisms, the influence of trauma and medication. One young doctor even seemed excited by my account, rattling off neuroscience about DMT release during near-death states and evolutionary adaptations to ease the transition to death. He wanted to write a paper on my case. I declined. Only one person seemed to really listen, a night nurse named Sarah. She was in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and calm hands that never rushed through procedures. My grandmother had an NDE during cardiac arrest. She told me one quiet night as she checked my IV, saw her long-dead sister, traveled through a tunnel of light, came back completely changed, started painting, which she'd never done before, said the colors on the other side were like nothing on earth, and she spent the rest of her life trying to capture them. Do you believe her? I asked. Sarah's eyes met mine steadily. I believe she experienced something profound that science can't fully explain. She adjusted my blanket. What we know about consciousness, about the nature of reality itself, it's just the tip of the iceberg, Sergeant Tanner. It wasn't exactly validation, but it was the first time someone hadn't immediately tried to explain away my experience. It helped. After 3 months of recovery and rehabilitation in Germany, I was stable enough to be transferred back to Walter Reed in the States. More surgeries followed, more physical therapy, more psychiatric evaluations. Somewhere in there, I was awarded a Purple Heart. My father placed it in a drawer at his house. Neither of us much cared about medals at that point. It was during my time at Walter Reed that I had my first confirmation, the first sign that what I'd experienced wasn't just in my head. Dave Connolly came to visit. He'd completed his tour and was on leave before his next assignment. Walking into my room, he was the same lanky, laconic guy I remembered, but with new lines around his eyes. You look like shit, Tanner. He greeted me, a smile breaking through his serious expression. "Still better looking than you," I shot back. We fell into easy conversation about the unit, about who had rotated home and who was still in country. He told me they'd renamed the Eastern Observation Post after me. Tanner Point, they called it now. Waiting for you to die to name something after you seems kind of backward. I joked. "Well, you screwed up their plan by surviving?" His smile faded. "Seriously, man. The medic said there's no way you should have made it. Called it a statistical impossibility." I studied his face. "Dave, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Always. When I was hit before the medic got there, did I say anything about my mother?" His expression changed, grew cautious. "Why? Just tell me." "Please." He shifted in his chair. "Yeah, you did. Right before you lost consciousness. You said Mom real clear, like you were talking to someone. Then you said, 'What message?' That's it. Then you were out." He looked at me intently. "Why?" "Kadam. What's that about?" I took a deep breath and told him. "Everything. The tunnel of light. My mother greeting me. The feeling of boundless love and connection. The glimpse of purpose I'd been shown. The choice to return. I left nothing out." When I finished, the room was silent, except for the hum of medical equipment. I expected the same skeptical look I'd gotten from everyone else. The psychiatric explanation. The gentle dismissal. Instead, Connolly leaned forward. "The night before the attack, you had a nightmare. You were thrashing around, muttering in your sleep. I heard you say Mom then too. And not yet, I remember thinking it was weird." I stared at him. "The dream. The warning. I never told anyone that," he continued. "Figured it was private. But now," he ran a hand through his short hair. "Look, I'm not religious or anything, but what happened on that hillside, you shouldn't have survived. Period. The amount of blood you lost, the time it took to get you to the field hospital, it doesn't add up." "You believe me?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "I believe something happened that I can't explain," he said carefully. "And I believe you're not crazy or making shit up." He met my eyes directly. "That's enough for me." That conversation with Dave was a turning point. Finally, someone had corroborated at least part of my experience. The part where I spoke to my mother before clinical death had even occurred. It wasn't proof in the scientific sense, but it was something solid to hold on to. 6 months after the attack, I was discharged from Walter Reed with a medical retirement. My body had healed as much as it was going to. I still had pain, still had a noticeable limp, still carried enough shrapnel in places too delicate to operate on that I'd never go through an airport metal detector without setting it off. But I was alive, and I had a purpose. I moved back to my dad's house in Greenfield temporarily. It wasn't ideal. Too many memories, too much unspoken tension around my near-death experience, but I needed time to figure out my next steps. The Army provided disability pay and veterans benefits, enough to live on while I sorted myself out. It was during this period that the second confirmation came. I was going through some of my mother's things in the attic. Dad had never been able to part with them when I found a journal I'd never seen before. Small, leather-bound, with her neat handwriting filling the pages. It appeared to be a dream journal she'd kept during the last year of her life. Most entries were mundane. Anxiety dreams about teaching, nostalgic dreams about her childhood. But then I found an entry dated just 3 weeks before her death. Had the most vivid dream last night. I was standing in a strange, barren landscape. All browns and tans, like a desert, but with mountains in the distance. Michael was there, but he looked older, in some kind of uniform. He was hurt, bleeding. I called to him, told him it wasn't time yet. I've never had a dream so real. Even after waking, I can still feel the dust on my skin, still see the look in his eyes. What could it mean? I sat back, the journal trembling in my hands. 3 weeks before her death, my mother had dreamed of calling to me in a landscape she'd never seen. The Afghan terrain where I would be injured years later. When I showed the journal to my father, he read the entry several times in silence. Then he looked up at me, his skepticism visibly cracking. "Your mother always said there was a thin veil between this world and the next," he said quietly. I never really believed her. He touched the journal page gently. Maybe I should have. It wasn't a full embrace of my experience, but it was the beginning of one, a door opening just a crack. The third confirmation came from an unexpected source. I'd started attending a veterans support group at the local VA, not because I thought they could help with my unique situation, but because I needed to be around others who understood the military experience. And because somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered those glimpses my mother had shown me. Veterans I was supposed to help. The group was small, just 8 of us plus a facilitator, a former Army psychologist named Dr. Harrison. Most sessions were standard. Discussions about transitioning to civilian life, coping with PTSD, navigating VA benefits. I participated minimally, never mentioning my near-death experience, until one evening when a new member joined, a Marine named Rodriguez who'd served in Helmand Province. He was tightly wound, hypervigilant, clearly struggling. During introductions, he mentioned he'd been in a vehicle hit by an IED. 3 of his squad died. He survived with relatively minor injuries. The thing that messes me up the most, he said, his voice low, isn't what you'd expect. It's not the guys who died. I mean, that's hard, but he took a deep breath. It's what I saw when I was unconscious after the blast. Sounds crazy. The room went very quiet. Dr. Harrison leaned forward slightly. What did you see, Marcus? Rodriguez looked around nervously, then fixed his gaze on the floor. A tunnel of light. And my grandfather, who died when I was a kid. He laughed bitterly. Classic near-death cliche, right? Except I've never told anyone because it wasn't just some hallucination. It was real. More real than this room. More real than anything. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My grandfather told me it wasn't my time. Rodriguez continued. Said I had unfinished business. Showed me. I can't really explain what he showed me. Like scenes from a life I haven't lived yet. My future, maybe. Before Dr. Harrison could respond with the usual psychological interpretation, I heard myself speaking. I believe you. Rodriguez looked up, startled. I believe you because the same thing happened to me, I said, in Afghanistan, 2011. I died for 16 minutes and 43 seconds. I saw my deceased mother. She showed me why I needed to come back. And everything you're describing, the realness of it, the clarity, I experienced that too. The room was so silent you could hear the HVAC system humming in the background. Dr. Harrison looked concerned, probably worried I was reinforcing what he saw as a delusion. But Rodriguez was staring at me like a drowning man who'd just spotted a life raft. You saw it too, he whispered. I nodded. Every bit of it. After the session, Rodriguez and I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 3 hours, comparing notes on our experiences. The similarities were striking. The tunnel, the deceased loved one, the sense of boundless love, the glimpse of purpose requiring a return. Even specific details matched, like the sensation of movement without moving and the clarity of communication without words. 2 men from completely different backgrounds, serving in different branches, injured years apart in different provinces of Afghanistan. Yet we'd experienced virtually identical journeys beyond the veil of death. That night, for the first time since returning home, I felt a profound sense of validation. It wasn't just me. I wasn't crazy or confused or oxygen deprived. Something real had happened, was happening beyond the understanding of conventional medicine or psychology. More importantly, I'd found what seemed to be the first thread of my purpose. Rodriguez told me later that our conversation had been the first time since his injury that he'd felt truly understood. That the burden of carrying his experience alone had been crushing him, making him question his sanity, driving him toward thoughts of suicide. Talking to you, he said, knowing someone else has been there, it changes everything. After that night, things began to accelerate. Rodriguez introduced me to another veteran he knew who'd had an NDE during combat. I met with her, and the 3 of us formed an unofficial support group. She knew 2 others. Within months, our group had grown to 12. All combat veterans, all with near-death experiences that traditional VA therapy couldn't adequately address. We started meeting weekly in the back room of a coffee shop owned by a Vietnam veteran sympathetic to our cause. No recording devices, no outside observers, no judgment. Just a safe space to share experiences that defied conventional explanation. The stories varied in details but aligned in essentials. Some saw deceased relatives, others military buddies who had fallen. A few encountered religious figures consistent with their faith traditions, but all described the same fundamental journey: the tunnel, the light, the profound love, the glimpse of purpose, the choice to return. Word spread through veteran networks. People started traveling from neighboring states to attend our meetings. I began receiving emails, Facebook messages, phone calls from veterans across the country who'd heard about the guy in Massachusetts who understands. Dr. Harrison from the VA caught wind of what was happening. Instead of trying to shut us down or correct our interpretations, he surprised me by asking if he could observe some sessions. For research purposes, he said. I was skeptical at first, but he seemed genuinely curious rather than dismissive. Look, he told me after sitting in on one meeting, I'm a scientist first. I believe in evidence, in measurable phenomena. But I'm also a human being who recognizes that science doesn't yet have all the answers. What's happening in that room, the healing I'm witnessing, that's real, regardless of how we interpret the experiences that led to it. With his help, we secured a permanent meeting space at the VA itself, a small but significant institutional acknowledgement. He also connected us with researchers from the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, one of the few academic institutions seriously studying near-death experiences. 2 years after my injury, what had started as informal conversations in a coffee shop had evolved into a structured support network with over 100 regular participants across New England. We called it Beyond the Veil, a nod to my mother's words about the thin barrier between worlds. It wasn't all smooth sailing. We faced skepticism from the medical establishment, ridicule from some quarters of the military community, and accusations of promoting religious propaganda from others. Some family members worried we were fostering delusions rather than healing, but the results spoke for themselves. Veterans who had been suicidal found reason to live. Those trapped in grief began to process their losses differently, comforted by the knowledge that consciousness continues. Many reported significant reductions in PTSD symptoms, particularly the existential dread that often accompanies combat trauma. The research team from UVA documented these outcomes meticulously, publishing a preliminary paper that sent ripples through both psychiatric and parapsychological communities. They couldn't explain the mechanism, but they couldn't deny the therapeutic effect. 3 years post-injury, I received a call from Walter Reed. They had a Marine captain, severely wounded in Syria, who was refusing psychiatric treatment and pain management. He claimed to have died on the operating table and returned with a message, but the staff didn't know how to respond to his experiences. Would I be willing to speak with him? I flew to Bethesda the next day. The Marine Captain James Weston had lost both legs and his right arm to an IED. His physical prognosis was stable, but psychologically he was in crisis. Not because of his injuries, the doctors explained, but because of his insistence on what he'd experienced while clinically dead for 4 minutes. When I entered his room, his eyes locked onto mine with desperate intensity. They told me you've been there, he said without preamble. To the other side, I nodded. I have. Then you know it's real. His voice cracked slightly. It's real, and they keep telling me it's not. I pulled a chair close to his bed. Tell me what you saw, Captain. For the next 2 hours, he described his journey, the familiar tunnel, the encounter with his best friend who'd been killed in Fallujah years earlier, the overwhelming sense of peace and purpose. His friend had shown him scenes of his future life, adapted to his new physical limitations, but filled with meaning and impact. I'm not afraid of being a triple amputee, he told me. I'm afraid of being silenced, of having the most profound truth I've ever known dismissed as a hallucination. I believe you, I said simply, and I'm not the only one. I told him about Beyond the Veil, about the community of veterans who shared his experience, about the research being done, about the healing that was possible when these experiences were honored rather than pathologized. By the end of our conversation, something had shifted in him. The desperate edge had softened. He asked me to bring him materials about our group, asked if we could set up video calls with other members while he recovered. Before I left, he grabbed my arm with his remaining hand. You know what the worst part was? Coming back to all this pain, all these limitations after experiencing that perfect freedom. Some days I wish I hadn't come back at all. I knew exactly what he meant. Your friends showed you why you needed to return. I reminded him, there's purpose in this pain. It doesn't make it hurt less, but it gives it meaning. What was your purpose? He asked. Why did you come back? I smiled slightly. I'm doing it right now. That visit to Walter Reed marked another turning point. Word spread through military medical channels about a unique approach to supporting veterans with near-death experiences. We began receiving referrals from military hospitals across the country. I found myself traveling frequently, meeting with wounded warriors who had glimpsed beyond the veil and returned confused, isolated, and unheard. Each conversation, each connection, resonated with what my mother had shown me in that realm of light. These were the faces I had seen, the souls I could reach because I spoke their language, understood their journey in a way no one else could. 5 years after my injury, Beyond the Veil had grown into a nationwide network with chapters at major VA facilities in 20 states. We'd developed training modules for military chaplains and VA mental health providers on how to support service members reporting near-death experiences. We'd partnered with researchers studying the phenomenon, contributing data while maintaining the sacred nature of each individual's experience. I was no longer limping quite as badly. The physical scars had faded to silver lines, but the experience itself remained as vivid, as present as the day it happened. That was true for most of us. The journey beyond death wasn't something that receded with time like normal memories. It remained crystalline, accessible, a touchstone of ultimate reality against which everything else was measured. My father, who had once been so skeptical, became one of our strongest supporters. He attended meetings occasionally, listening to stories that echoed what I'd been telling him for years. The accumulated weight of so many similar accounts from credible veterans gradually eroded his materialist worldview. "Your mother would be proud," he told me one evening as we sat on his porch. "She always said you had a special purpose." I guess she was right. She told me herself. I reminded him gently. He nodded, gazing out at the darkening yard. "I believe you now, son." He hesitated. Do you think she's watching? Can they see us from there?" It was a question many family members asked. "I don't know exactly how it works," I answered honestly. But I felt her awareness of my life while I was there, like she'd been following my journey all along. "So yes, I think she sees you. Loves you still." He wiped his eyes quickly with the back of his hand. "Some confirmations need no words." 7 years after my injury, I received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was familiar, though I hadn't heard it in years. "Staff Sergeant Tanner, this is Dr. Abramson. I treated you at Landstuhl back in 2011. "I remember," I said, surprised. "What can I do for you, doctor?" There was a long pause. "I've been following your work with Beyond the Veil," he said finally, "reading the research papers, the testimonials." And another pause. "I owe you an apology. When you tried to tell me about your experience, I dismissed it, categorized it neatly within my medical paradigm. I was arrogant. I wasn't sure how to respond. The thing is," he continued, "you're not the first patient I've had who reported such experiences. Just the most persistent." He laughed softly. "Over the years, I've collected dozens of accounts, too consistent to ignore, reported by people too credible to dismiss." "What are you saying, Dr. Abramson?" "I'm saying I believe something profound is happening that deserves serious scientific inquiry. And I'm saying I'd like to help if you're open to it." That conversation led to the first formal medical partnership for Beyond the Veil, a research and support program at Landstuhl specifically for service members reporting near-death experiences. Dr. Abramson led the initiative, bringing scientific rigor while maintaining respect for the spiritual dimensions involved. It represented a bridge being built between worlds, between the scientific and the spiritual, between the explainable and the mysterious, between those who had crossed beyond the veil and those who sought to understand from this side. 10 years after my injury, on the anniversary of my death and return, I found myself standing at my mother's grave. It was a clear February day, cold but bright. I'd brought blue hydrangeas, her favorite. As I placed them against the headstone, I felt a familiar presence. Not supernatural, just the enduring connection to her that had sustained me through this journey. "I delivered your message, Mom," I said quietly. "Over and over again, to hundreds of them now." The message was simple but profound. They are never alone. Love remains. Death is not the end of the story, just the turning of a page. In the decades since my return, I'd witnessed that message transform lives, restore hope, reunite families. I'd seen hardened combat veterans weep with relief upon learning their experiences were real, shared, meaningful. I'd watched suicidal veterans choose life after understanding that death is not an escape, but a transition for which we should be prepared. Was it easy? Many days I still struggled with pain, both physical and emotional. Many nights I longed for the peace I'd experienced in that realm of light. The contrast between that perfect communion and the limitations of earthly existence could be stark, painful. But I understood now why I'd been sent back. The glimpses my mother had shown me had come to pass. Face after face, soul after soul. Veterans whose lives intersected with mine at precisely the moment they needed to hear the truth I carried. Dave Connolly had been one of them. 2 years after our conversation at Walter Reed, he'd been caught in an ambush in Iraq. He survived, but 3 of his team didn't. The survivor's guilt nearly destroyed him until he found his way to beyond the veil. Now he led a chapter in Oregon, using his own journey to guide others. As I stood at my mother's grave, I thought about the mystery of it all, how her death had prepared me to understand my own, how her spiritual openness had seeded the ground for my journey, how even her dreams had foretold what would come to pass. Had it all been part of a plan, a divine orchestration, or simply the mysterious interweaving of consciousness across the apparent boundaries of life and death? I didn't have all the answers. None of us did, but I had enough truth to navigate by, enough light to see the path ahead. Thank you, I whispered to her grave, to her spirit, to whatever lay beyond the veil that separated us temporarily. For calling me home, and for sending me back. A gentle wind stirred the hydrangeas. Somewhere, a bird called. The sun broke through clouds, warming my face. Simple moments, yet charged with meaning when viewed through the lens of what I now knew. That all of this, the pain and beauty of physical existence, was just one chapter in a much longer story. I turned from the grave and walked back toward my car, where my father waited. We were heading to a Beyond the Veil meeting afterward, a special session for military family members trying to understand their loved ones' experiences. My purpose continued to unfold, one conversation at a time, one soul at a time. The message remained the same, as true now as it had been in that realm of light. We are never alone. Love remains. Death is not the end of the story. It's only the turning of a page. That knowledge changed everything. It had saved me, saved countless others, and would continue to save those who needed it most. Not through spectacle or dogma, but through the simple sharing of truth from someone who had been there and come back to tell about it. I died in Afghanistan from a mortar attack. I heard my mother calling me home, and I returned with a message the world needed to hear.